So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 415, and let's just say that we're going to get some interesting aspects of this chapter. A potential reveal involving All For One, getting to see some more of Deku trying to transfer One For All. Whether or not it's successful or not, well, you're going to have to watch this video to find out. But first, right after this. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew. I'm here to do my manga review for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 415, titled Rejection. And unfortunately, I know very much what it means to be rejected. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we are talking about the chapter of My Hero Academia and what's going on with the fight between Deku and Tomura Shigaraki, and how Deku is getting inching closer to actually potentially defeating Tomura, but it's still going to be a long struggle. And we're going to see a little bit more of that struggle in this chapter, so let's just dive right into it and talk about the chapter. And from what we get with the chapter, we're just getting more images and flashing to the memories of Deku and Tomura, as well as some memories that they both share. We cut over to USJ, where we see Mineta and Froppy during the boat incident, but we also get a small moment of seeing how these characters remember that situation, as we see Shigaraki in his older form looking at Kurogiri, as well as we get Deku remembering the USJ Nomu, as well as Tsuyu and Mineta. And what is interesting about this moment is the dialogue that actually comes from Yoichi, how he remembers about how what is happening is something very unique. The fact that he believes that both One For All and All For One are beginning to resonate, and how his brother's ambitions have finally reached this point, but that it kind of is built upon what One For All was meant for, to break down the evils inside of people, and that all of the generations were just leading to this moment. And this really just shows the ideals of what Yoichi believes in, and why he believes in Deku so much, and how this type of monologue leads into potentially the sacrifice that Deku has to make of giving up all of his quirks if it means breaking down the barrier inside of Tomura and potentially saving him, which is the indication of the vestiges inside of his arm apparently about to be transferred to Tomura in this moment. And you may be wondering, oh no, Deku is quirkless. What are we going to do now? Well, there's actually something interesting that actually prevents Deku from transferring all of the quirks to Tomura. Because we see that as they scream each other's name, Deku places a massive attack on Tomura's chest, as we see the vestiges of One For All spinning together and seeming to pierce through the barrier, or at least one of them piercing through the barrier, but it seems as if the other five were actually rejected and thrown back into Deku, which is a surprise to everyone, and even Banjo brings up this surprise, but clarifies that even after that, they were still able to do damage to Tomura by In, who, as I predicted, was the one that was at the very least able to break through and hit the core. But yeah, they give a brief explanation for why All For One inside of Tomura was actually able to reject One For All, and most likely the idea of if All For One wanted a will strong enough to steal One For All, then that same will could be strong enough to reject it. And then you just have Deku thinking to himself how he wishes he could take advantage of the fingers, and how they're most likely synonymous with like fingernails or dirt, which is actually reference to what was said by Shigi For All in the actual initial fight, where we saw the reveal of these fingers when he was fighting against the pro heroes in Bakugo on that flying fortress. So it's cool that Deku was able to come to that same conclusion, but he also comes to an even more greater conclusion, that he's actually approaching the core of Tomura, of Tenko, as he sees an image of Tenko holding the hand of a black suited figure, most likely All For One. And here's something where I have to talk about the theory that All For One gave Tomura Tenko his quirk. And while this image very much hints at that idea being a possibility, it is unfortunately not outright confirmed. And when I mean outright confirmed, I mean the confirmation that we get in this chapter is not substantial enough in comparison to what we saw with Dabi and the reveal that All For One was directly responsible for his survival. But for my personal opinion, I think that whether or not Tenko actually was born with the quirk or was given the quirk by All For One, it really does not change the dynamic of who Tenko is, which is that whether or not he was quirkless or a quirked individual, he still had a path that could have led him down the path of being a hero as well as being a villain, quirkless or not. And that's just my 2 cents on it. And with that in mind, we're actually approaching the end of the chapter. This is actually a relatively shorter chapter with approximately 11 pages, as well as potentially having Horikoshi being on break. But we begin to end the chapter as we see the massive fingers coming to attack Deku, as he has the resolve to continue fighting against him and want to transfer more and more quirks as he's approaching the ability to potentially save Tenko through his own beliefs and ideals inside of his mind. We actually just go over to seeing what's going on at the Flying UA Fortress as we get to see one of Mei Hatsume's just flying drones that appears to be what is broadcasting this entire battle to the world. And if you remember correctly, there was a moment, most likely either due to Skeptic or just potentially some other secondary villain. Unfortunately, the feed had to be cut, so not a lot of people were actually seeing what was happening in the fight between Deku and Tomura Shigaraki until recently. So there's a gap of time that people see them fighting, and then it cuts, and now it's back. And we see that Mei Hatsume was able to work with Gentle Criminal and Cementos to either do something to prevent the Flying UA Fortress from completely crashing down and being destroyed, but from what we're seeing, they're able to get some people out of the building, but it seems as if she, as well as a few other people, will remain inside while working on some type of scientific doodads to either help Deku later on in the fight, or at least keep the recording going or keep the live stream going. But what's interesting about this moment is just the real characterization that we get with Mei Hatsume as well as La Brava. How they're planning on supporting Deku for their own personal means, but also just really showing how much Deku has influenced everybody else to want to be a hero in a sense, and not just be characters on the sidelines, but actually taking initiative to try and help him. And with that in mind, we actually cut over to where we get to see the inside of an evacuation center, where we see that Ectoplasm is calling for someone to wait and come back, as the chapter ends with Eri crying, most likely wanting to support Deku as well. And this is very interesting because there are many implications that you can make with Eri being at the end of this chapter. Is she just going to support Deku from the sidelines and give him like some type of wishing energy with her quirk? Or is she somehow actually going to go to the location where Deku is and actually help him that way? Me personally, what I think is going to happen is that she's going to see Deku fighting, but she's going to be inspired to want to support him and cheer for him, and this is going to spread with everyone at the shelter. And that maybe the wishing energy could come into effect, but what this is setting up is something critical happening to Deku, and that potentially within the near future, Eri is going to help him, either healing him, or if he loses the quirk of One For All, giving that quirk back to him, and this is going to be a part of her hero moment, and I think this is what that ending is most likely setting up. But yeah, overall, that's pretty much my review for this chapter. And like I said, we're going to be on break for 2 weeks, but something else that I forgot to mention is Horikoshi's comments. Yes, there's actually a small section where Horikoshi has his comments, and typically they're very innocuous, nothing to really like bat an eye at, but this one's a very interesting one because he gives an explanation of what Deku's look in the last chapter was, and it's called Deku Overlay. But he likes to think of it as carnage in his mind, which makes sense for Horikoshi since he's a big Spider-Man fan. And something I didn't really bring up, but in hindsight it tracks so well, is that this new image of Deku from last chapter is very much synonymous, if not very much looks a lot like Carnage when he is going crazy as well. But yeah, Overall, really enjoyed this chapter. A lot of what we got in this chapter is just continued from what we saw with the last chapter. A little bit of action, a little bit of characterization, and really some explanations and hinting to what's to come in the new future, as well as pretty much the end of this chapter setting up potentially a transition to another location. Maybe we'll be transferred to see what's going on with Sarah. Maybe we'll see what's happening with characters all around the world, or maybe we'll see what's happening between Eraserhead, Kurogiri, as well as Present Mike within the next chapter or two. It's really anyone's guess. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about that chapter. And let me ask you, what did you think of the chapter? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? And do you think that the person that is holding Tinkle's head is all for it? And if he gave him the quirk of Decay? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!